Chris here with another fresh tip for you all. In this video, we are going to continue our look at painting the BladeGuard Veteran Primaris Marine in the Brazen Claws color scheme. And in this video, we are going to work on the sword. And we're going to give it a kind of somewhat kind of a glowing energy kind of vibe. Kind of like, I guess, kind of like the dark saber from Star Wars kind of thing. To get us started, we're going to use some ceramite white, and we're going to slap a little bit onto the palette. We're going to just grab a generous amount of water to thin the color down. Because this is a base coat, we really don't need a thinner, just because, there's quite a bit of surface area to cover, and we will apply more than one layer onto this sword. Now, even with this one layer, you can see the white is quite strong on the surface, and in fact in person you can still see some of that gray primer kind of poking through, so we will have to apply multiple layers. But as I apply multiple layers, I keep the mixture somewhat thin with a little bit of water, and I do about 3 layers, but they're really thin, so I get nice smooth even coverage. Next, we're going to jump into some technical Tesseract Glow. We're going to grab a little bit. We're going to slap a little bit onto the palette, just thin it out ever so slightly with some water. You can see it's a fairly generous amount of water there. We're going to thin this down just with some water and then apply this onto the blade. Now, I'm not going to just kind of ham-fist it onto the surface of the blade. And we're going to treat this like a glaze. And so anywhere where there's kind of pooling up, I do take the brush, clean it off, and then draw the excess paint out of the surface so that we don't get any heavy color deposited onto any of the surfaces. And because we've applied it in such a thin fashion, this color is really bright. You can see here on camera, but to the eye, this looks like a fluorescent lime green, even with just this coverage here. And I was actually kind of tempted to do kind of a lightsaber-y type of thing, but I thought, no, let's stick to the original plan, which was kind of going for a dark saber kind of effect. So some of you might not be familiar with what a dark saber effect is. It's basically the outer edges are glowing and the center is very dark. And so that is our goal moving forward. Here I'm applying a second layer just right out of the bottle, and I'm trying to leave that very edge in the first layer. And so really I'm concentrating more color in towards the central core of the blade itself. It's not too easy to see on the camera here, but the outer edge is still that same brightness. We're going to take some Warp Lightning, some contrast medium. We're going to thin this down, just 2 drops, I do believe, and a fairly generous amount in the bristles. We're going to give this a thorough mixing so that we don't see any marbling in it. It's a nice even look to it. And of course, we are going to continue our process of glazing and deepening the color in the center of the blade, trying to leave that outer edge as bright as possible, because again, we don't really want to like just simply cover it and move along and end up covering over anywhere. We want it to remain bright, because then we just got to come back and fix that. And it's kind of that thing of just not going over the same space twice kind of thing, trying to be efficient with our coverage. Here you can see the first layer was dry, so we're applying a second layer. And this is still the thinned out iteration of Warp Lightning. Warp Lightning? Yeah, Warp Lightning. Again, it's a slow process, glazing like this, but because of the nature of these contrast paints, and of course the Tesseract Glow as well, they're very thin paints as well, that glazing is really not a problem. In fact, these kind of colors are really fantastic at this kind of job as far as, creating layers and glazing. And in fact, if you're not that familiar with glazing, this is a fun little stepping stone as far as kind of working with these concepts. And if you've ever followed along with other painters who do a lot of glazing, you can follow along using these kind of colors, because they're really fantastic in that regards as far as building up transition and working with thin colors. It's very forgiving for a glazing process. Caliban Green is next. We're going to slap a little bit onto the palette. We're going to add a drop of Lumion Medium. Actually, I think 2 drops of Medium. No, just 1, apparently. Apparently, I don't remember what I was doing, and I just did this. Thin the color out. I think just the dampness of the brush to thin the color a little bit more, and I'm applying a fairly heavy amount in the core. Again, we're working to create a gradient of color along the blade. And the hard part actually was determining where the border was as far as what was glowing and what was going to get darker. And so this is really kind of just a process for me as far as kind of working out visually how far I wanted to go. And in fact, when I hit this point, I was actually kind of tempted to leave it as such because I was kind of happy with how the overall feeling was. Here I'm just taking a bit of water, thinning it down to a glaze, and then I'm applying it just to help marry some of those transitions together. It ends up pushing the entirety of the blade down a bit because this glaze does go over a lot of the other colors that we have already established on here, but that's okay because, again, like I said, we can always come back and re-brighten it up, but I was fine with that. I really was concentrating on creating a really dark blade. And then here I'm just simply laying another layer. I mean, who's been keeping count right now as far as how many layers have been applied? I don't even know because I don't show all the layers I apply because sometimes it requires like 5 layers sometimes to build up a nice little transition. Again, glazing is really an exercise in patience as well. And for me personally, I mean, I could have just as easily done this doing a wet on wet blend or, you know, something along those lines. You could even airbrush this thing. Abaddon Black is next with some Lamian Medium. I think we only add 1 drop into that just to thin it out ever so slightly. And of course, when I apply this, I also use the dampness of the brush just to thin the color out just a little bit more as well. The whole point behind adding the medium is so that the paint flows like paint and not like a watered down paint where it just kind of, you know, bubbles up and pools everywhere and runs everywhere and just, you know, you really have not quite as much control, especially because we're trying to maintain control as we work our way inwards and preserve a lot of the surface. At this point with the Abaddon Black, I also base coat the handle of the sword as well because I want this to be quite dark. I was considering doing it a gold, but then I probably would have done that when I was doing the non-metallic gold around the rest of the model. So I decided against it because I wanted to go for something different, contrasty, and, you know, it's different. Very generous amount of water, thin the black down, of course, just turning into a slight glaze. And then here again, I'm just going to glaze as carefully as I can towards the edge of the blade, but I'm only looking to darken up in towards the core, making that all nice and dark. And again, you can see I'm kind of like waving the brush, and I'm kind of doing that sort of like, you know, like on Japanese samurai swords, how they have that, what is that, hamon through the edge of a blade. I was kind of getting that kind of vibe as I was working away with the color and everything like that. So next, we're going to take some Incubi Darkness, 2 drops of a medium just to thin the color out ever so slightly, and we're going to glaze in some highlights. And this is mainly for the handle, but I also do the one facet of the blade. So you can see on the central edge of the sword, I'm only applying the color on that edge that is upwards. And I'm also doing this on the other side of the blade. It's not shown, but I am painting the other side of the sword. The highlight on the top part of that blade, it was an aesthetics choice, and also just because, I mean, I didn't want to leave it as a pure black as it felt kind of lazy, so I simply just layered in some highlights here. Now, because we've thinned out this Incubi Darkness for glazing, we do have to apply it, I do believe, 2 or 3 times on surfaces, and because you can work with it in that fashion, the less and less paint you work with, the more gradual your transitions can be. You know, if you lay it about, you know, 2/3 the way down, then halfway, and then 1/4 of the way, that kind of thing. Stegodon Scale Green is next, I do believe. And with this color, we're going to thin it down with some medium. Again, we're going to turn it into a glaze. And with this, we're going to apply a few layers, building up our transitions of color. And I'm not doing anything like non-metallic metal or super slick, shiny surface or anything like that. It's just a straightforward kind of highlighting process. So it's really just kind of the highlights are being placed on the uppermost portions of details to represent, you know, the light kind of coming straight down at the surface. And on the blade itself, we're trying to be very careful as we stay close to the central edge of that blade, the core. I don't know what the heck is that spine called. I don't know what the heck it's called. But anyway, also catch the wire that runs up the blade as well. I had considered doing something with that little thing, that little doodad that runs up the blade. Oftentimes gets, you know, painted like it's an energy source or what have you. We might do something like that later. I don't know. I'm going to take some Celestra Gray, add it into this Stegodon Scale Green. It's sort of like a 1-to-1 mix ratio, but not quite. And then, of course, I'm working within a fairly thinned out condition so that we can do some edge highlighting. Of course, even when you are working with it in a thinned out fashion, you do have to be mindful that, especially with small highlights like this, that it's actually a little bit better to maintain a bit of that original viscosity of the paint when it's first out of the bottle. So really, it's kind of undiluted paint that you're really going to maintain a lot of control, especially if you're going to try and be precise like this. But sometimes it's a real pain. Here, unfortunately, it was a little out of focus getting that edge to happen there, so I just did it off camera kind of thing. Well, mostly. We're going to take some pure Celestial Gray, just a drop of medium to thin the color out, and then very carefully here, we're going to just catch some top highlights and just really kind of pick out some corners and things of that nature. You can see it's a very, very, very minimal highlight we're applying onto the surface here. And of course, we'll also apply it to the blade as well. I think we bring that edge just to the forward central high point of the sword, the stabby end, you know, of the sword. I don't know, I'm not a sword guy, so I'm sure everybody out there who knows the anatomy of a sword is like, come on, Chris. Everybody's screaming at their screen right now. But there it is. That is the final effect of the sword. I'm pretty happy with it. In fact, you can see how that edge is just really, really bright. Again, it has that fluorescent look, and I think it's really, really fun. You can see there I'm just demonstrating that I did paint the other side of the blade, and I think it is really, really fun. I could have just as easily gone for a full kind of lightsaber-like effect for this blade, but I thought, no, that's a bit much, and you know, we're not done with this guy yet, and so we're going to do some other things as well. But hopefully you guys enjoyed that one, and hopefully you know, you try it on your models. Big thank you to my patrons. Without their support, this channel would not be able to continue, so a huge thank you. Click the link in the description below and it'll take you off to Patreon, where there's varying tiers of support, and a huge thank you to everybody who does. Take care of those brushes and they will take care of you.